My name is Tosin. I am a writer and a producer. I'm also a poet, so I sometimes infuse that into some of my writing, or sometimes just perform standalone poetry.
Hi, TOLULOPE Ajayi. I've been a creative professional for most of my life. I currently now teach, as well as I teach at the Heavenly Life Creative Academy as head of department.
This is another episode of the Pan-African Film Podcast. And today I'm joined by TOSIN OTUDEKO and Tolu Ajayi.
Yes.
Hi. I am so happy to have you here today. Really, really thrilled and honored really to have even shared that wonderful production Over the Bridge, which was made by primarily, you two as the filmmakers. So Tolu here is dialing in from Lagos, Nigeria, and he was both producer, director in the production.
I did. Essentially, I was the director. Did a little bit of development when I was, but
right.
Yeah.
And then Tosin, you're dialing in from London, is that right? You're in London.
Yes, from the UK
today. But for Over the Bridge, you actually wrote the original script and were a key producer as well. And just to give the audience a little background on what is Over the Bridge, right? Over the Bridge is like a beautiful feature film, and just so the audience knows, it's like 2 hours plus, right? But yes, it flew by for me, and it's a drama, fantasy, kind of inspirational film. It's a beautifully shot, like allegory / parable, and kind of modern take on what is the meaning of life kind of story. So I wanted to start off by just Tolu and Tosin in any order, kind of giving me a brief introduction about yourselves, because we had an opportunity to chat separately, and Tosin does some other amazing work, and Tolu himself, we were just mentioning earlier, is also an educator. But in your own words, tell us a little bit about who you are first.
Tosin, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. My name is Tosin. I am a writer and a producer. I'm also a poet, so I sometimes infuse that into some of my writing, or sometimes just perform standalone poetry. It's been really amazing going on this journey for the last couple of years, because it's something that I've been wanting to do for such a long time. I segued from theatre, specifically musical theatre, and yes, and I'm just really looking forward to all that the journey has in store. Okay.
Hi, TOLULOPE Ajayi. I've been a creative professional for most of my life. As a child, I used to be an illustrator. Then I began in advertising. I did that for about 2 decades, working from writing copy to also making commercials. I was actually a producer. I produced a lot of commercials, and that gave me a lot of insights into the process and meeting opportunities. I started making television. So my first directing was around 2008 when I made a soap opera. I was one of 4 directors that we all shot this TV series together. And I've been making films, still working in advertising sometimes. And lately, this is all I do. I currently now teach, as well as I teach at the Heavenly Life Creative Academy as head of department of film directing. And I think that's the sum total. so far of the story.
Thank you. That's awesome. That's awesome to hear, you know, that all the creativities are fusing and merging, and obviously at a Pan-African level here. So that's all that this podcast is about. So we welcome you here. This is a safe space where we want to just really dive into Over the Bridge, because I wanted to hear just how did your collaboration come about, right? You mentioned these interesting backgrounds, but how did TOSIN and Tolu like merge together to make Over the Bridge?
For my, this is my take. So TOSIN, we first met, we were both judges. So I was the judge, we were both judges on a film, on a TV, it was a TV show. It was sort of like a scripted reality show for creatives.
Yeah.
And where they would get directors, actors together, and they'll be put in a house. Then the judges will come and look at what they've done. So I was the judge for film directing. TOSIN was, well, not the judge, like mentor. I was a mentor for film directing, and TOSIN was the mentor for the writers. And she would talk the way I really like how TOSIN was. She had this really good energy, and when she always had builds, she would always build the students up, even when they weren't, you know, on the mark. But she would always build them up. Then I think subsequently, we happened to run into each other again. We're both speakers at an event, and we started talking. It was in the parking lot. Your friend was with you. I think Omoye was with you again. And we're in the parking lot when she started telling me, you know what, this we should make this movie. Da 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 da. I said, okay. I think that's where it began.
And I concur, definitely. So when I first met Tolu, after talking to him from the reality TV show, I started to get to know his works. One of them was called The Encounter, which was a short film. And it had such an interesting perspective from the point of view of the character, the lead character. The overarching story was about the Biafran War. And it was just, I think it was one of those short movies that leave a real indelible impact on you because, it was told from such an emotive standpoint. And so from there, I knew that that this was obviously a director that really took just storytelling, but was able to really handle emotional storytelling, that storytelling that kind of really gets to the core of the character's journey. And so I felt he was definitely the right person to be able to work on this project, spoke to him about it, and we were able to start a development process that really helped to shape the script and what it is that we see, the vision that you basically see on screen, and that it was a really rewarding process. And I can go on and on about
we really
about
can.
what we added to the project, etc. But there was a depth of experience and I think a depth of understanding in terms of layering that was really important to the project, and a lot of which you can see it transpired on screen.
Right, for sure. And when you talk about your poetry and you talk about your background, Tolu, it's like it just definitely clarifies how it's a very poetic film. It's a very beautiful take, unique perspective on Lagos, right? The city that everyone kind of hears about. It can be like a horror story or like the most beautiful like retreat or escape, right?
Wow.
So the juxtaposition of those two worlds within that one city, it was just very beautiful. And then Folarin, the leading character, as you say, is the protagonist for over 2 hours to hold your attention. You really go into his mind, who he is, his essence, his core, and who is Folarin for each one of you. Like, what does he represent, and the allegorical meanings of the overall story?
Well, for me, I don't know where TOSIN should go first because Tosin presented me with a video. She had always spoken to me, and the initial idea of the story came from a woman that had not seen her man in years, and things had happened. And I was looking for it from from a different perspective. And again, too, there's a story I feel that only two people that have themselves matured through life. Because as she was telling me the story, I was now asking what would make someone abandon his responsibilities, you know? And I now thought about, you know that thing about men live lives of quiet desperation. And the reality of it is, you know, I'm speaking as a Nigerian man, the responsibility you have to kind of quietly just carry and have a mask over it. So we're culturally conditioned to have a veneer of it's all good, you know, this is being handled. And Folarin has been friends, uncles, colleagues, fathers, you know, of people I know. So there's a lot of people that will not let you see what is really going on, whilst internally they're dissolving. And I sort of took a lot of the things I knew and I was experiencing, you know, into this character until we could show, you know, men. And I felt it was something that diasporans, Black men, could see, because we're all supposed to be built on the model of strength. And this character was kind of going through it, you know, having to wear this mask and present as this while he struggles as something else.
Yes, and I think I'll just also take from that point. I mean, Folarin, I was just thinking now as Tolu was speaking that I don't know why I was drawn to write this story, but I knew I had to write it. So from the time the idea came, it was actually many years ago, and I was driving back from my grand aunt's funeral, and because I was driving back through a particular part of Lagos that you have to cross the bridge, in a sense, to get to. And I started imagining this man living an anonymous life on the other side of Lagos. Like, what would, you know, how could somebody in the same city live this sort of life away from what would be, what would one would call a comfortable or affluent life, and what would, you know, cause him to do that? What's he escaping from? What is he running away from? And of course, the issues of mental health were you know, grew considerably over those years, where I started getting drawn more to people in a sense, feeling caged by their own circumstances. And those circumstances aren't always deplorable. Those circumstances are mental. Those circumstances are your moral choices. Those circumstances are things that you may not have, and they're not obvious as well, in a sense, and could be obviously presenting themselves as perfection. So I was really interested in studying the life of this man who, you know, again, is like somebody I feel I knew, or at least certainly by the end of it, I feel I'd gotten to know him and was, you know, an opportunity, I guess, to advocate for him, this particular person, in a particular way, in terms of his vulnerabilities. But he did represent either somebody, it could be a family member, somebody who I've known, or men who I've observed over the years in terms of how they deal with these struggles internally, when externally there's so much expected of them.
Yeah. Those reality checks are important. If we don't have a support system that kind of gives it to us on a regular basis, you know, as the saying goes, like, you wear the mask, you know, but how long will it last?
There you go. There you go.
Everybody wears the mask at some point. Or some people all the time, right? It's just really vary. So you're right. And it is an important story to tell on the continent, especially where sometimes we don't have those resources, right? That are more readily available. And you might see it on an extreme scale. So I totally love how you exactly portrayed all of that happening within the same city, and just the extremity of his circumstances was really, really intense and beautiful to watch.
You do understand, right?
Yes, boss. I understand. So long we keep to our promise.
On that day, I didn't see misdemeanor. I saw great.
I'm sorry. I cannot help you, Folarin. Cut your losses. Get out.
I saw determination.
For this job, you're either leading the race or losing.
I'm just tired of making excuses. Like, I don't even ask for anything anymore. I just want him to show up. Why can't he do that?
Folarin, you can't roll with the big fish without swimming the deep end.
Will this affect the project?
I also really loved like the role of Kevin and his overall impact on the story for me was profound. But I wanted to hear from you, you know, can you tell the audience a little bit about who was Kevin and like why was his role so impactful?
Kevin sort of represented to the effect of this duality, this moral duality. It can't be expressed with the exception of the impact these sort of men tend to have on society. It's measured in their recruits, you know, it's measured in their mentees, and it's a large part of the culture that, you know, they become the logs that are thrown into the fire many times. They're the ones that feel the effect of, oh, okay, and it's a common thing that I sort of notice, you know, sometimes in the financial industry of the recruits being the ones that carry they carry a lot of responsibilities, and they're often thrown under the bus whilst you know the bus keeps moving and goes to different jobs. And Kevin, and it's for I've seen it all, you know, from across. It's not just one of the things I remember saying at the at the New York premiere was about men with microphones. So whenever there's a man with a microphone, he always has acolytes or people around him who will suffer. so Kevin represented some of that. It could even be a motivational speaker who's dual about his message, who says one thing, does another. And Kevin represented all of that. He's the impact of that life, of the person not being true to themselves, or the person not getting the right kind of. And Kevin represents that. And just about that, he's also a very solid human being that people don't see. He's effective. It's only when he's in a film. It's only when his epitaph, his obituary is being read, or the priest or the pastor comes to the house, or the imam comes to the house. They're not saying, "Oh, he was a great guy. He was this," but he's only one thing to these people. You know, a useful tool or a colleague. Yeah, it's only in his death that he's finally a full person. He's a husband, has children, has a whole other life. You know, so that's probably the tragedy of that character.
Absolutely. And I think in creating Kevin, first of all, he was being created as part of Folarin's world, really. So representing Folarin's work world. So you had Folarin's external face, external world to the public, to government, to to the business community, etc. And of course, to his wife. But then you had the interpersonal relationships he had with those he actually worked with. And those are probably the people who saw the real Folarin. So there was Kevin, there was also his secretary, his personal assistant, Laide. And I remember Kevin was probably a character, and I know he sort of grew certainly over the years in his understanding. And some of the things he went through, as an example, would be things that you would find people in that cadre or the level in their work situations where pretty much their hands are tied. And because he believed so much in his boss and his vision, he is already in a compromised position because he did believe in the dream that he really did look up to Folarin. And he did represent to an extent the humanity. We probably just didn't have enough time. I mean, it would have been lovely to really expound on Kevin and their relationship as well. But Kevin's actually somebody that Folarin also really believed in. So it was a dual, it was actually a symbiotic relationship in a sense that was cut short. And that was the tragedy of it, in a sense. And so he did represent what could be possible on this very interpersonal level. Of course, the community represented it on a macro level, but his relationship with Kevin was more on this quite direct personal level that unfortunately he would never be able to see realized, again, being a casualty of the entire system, adding to Folarin's mental stress. So Kevin just really represented that casualty and the humanity, like we talked about, of society. And I recall once actually working in an office where I remember, I think my boss was asking me to sign something, and I didn't have any prior knowledge of what it was I was signing. And because I was quite a stickler for documentation and things like, I don't know, well, just really just knowing what it is that I'm putting my name to. I remember just arguing with him. That was part of the issues I had working with this particular boss. Arguing with him, like, why should I sign? I'm not going to say, no, you just sign it. And I remember he just kept insisting that I sign it. And I just remember, and sort of in writing Kevin, I remember that sort of scenario as well, where, you are very much, you're compromised and you can find yourself really getting carried away in the system, as a lot of people do, so much so that it just becomes a fragment of your daily life. But unfortunately, in this instance, it was a tragedy. Yeah.
I do recall there's something, just a little bit too, was like, one of the things Tosin and I discussed was like, Folarin himself was a Kevin.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we had the juxtaposition of the scenes where his own boss is telling him, this is how we're going to run this. And so it's pretty much as a cycle, in the system. So
yeah, there's very much that sense of protege and that bond cut short, and the humanity in it. Definitely you can amplify it from that really deep small relationship one-on-one to a broader humanity. Like, there's so many tragedies, you're right, there's so many of us. I can totally relate, having worked in finance, and I could totally relate to Kevin. The tragedy of Kevin was impactful in the story, I think, in a way, for me, that was profound because of, as you say, Folarin's reaction, right? It's the one thing I thought was kind of triggering for him. It was like when he got to his saddest, I think, lowest point emotionally. And I think it was because there was initially that kind of sense of belief in each other, a sense of purpose that he'd already lost at home. He'd already lost in so many other places and locations. I kind of felt like it was the straw that breaks the camel's back, or whatever the saying goes, for Folarin, who was like our main character, right? Like, I was rooting for him to regain some kind of sense of, less stress, because that's ultimately the factor here. What causes us to drop, as you say, Tolu, everything we know, like a whole reality, and switch. And that was because, again, that transition, so over the bridge, just so beautiful, all of it visually, allegorically. And then as I was saying to Tosin earlier, like I guess, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, the catabasis, which is the Greek, this kind of convention. And I remembered studying it because I had done like Dante's Inferno, where that in Italian literature, where I've seen it there, and the Greeks use it, and so many people use that journey, sort of that life cycle that we experience on the micro level, at much different levels of social and religious and theological studies, right? So why the Calabasas? Like, why over the bridge? Tell us more about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Take it away, Tolu.
I was it was crazy. So I was thinking about when we actually decided on the location to be across the sea. So the waters had had this very strong metaphor, one for the journey of the character and where he would have to go to when he get away from it all. And as Tosin started kind of also we started talking back and forth, and it's like, I'm like, oh, this is kind of like the character is, he's being ferried to the land of the dead. But we weren't thinking about it in necessarily the dark version of it, because as Africans, our cosmology does alternate differently with it just being a continuum, and it was also it would be this perfect idyllic location, that is disrupted by him sort of also as well. So I was guided a lot because it was just that the idea that journey and that the ferryman taking him away, but as opposed to how it's done in the Greek films, where it's sort of dark, foreboding, you're handing over coins. He's dying to self. And there's a more restorative quality on this journey to the land of the dead, because it's he's reinfused with life to it. So we just kind of had there's a bit of a slant, an adaptation of that concept, but with the African idea that he's going on a metaphysical journey as well, but it's more restorative for him. In a canoe with he ends up living with this person, but the character is actually in real life dead because that entire village was destroyed. So there was a village that was destroyed too. One of the things I realized was when we did it, because the film itself had a lot of our stories in it, that we were not essentially like waving picket signs or anything, but there were the industrialization or the building of certain projects often eradicates communities that have lived peacefully, and in that ecologies are destroyed, and the idea of the place was going to already having been destroyed by the same progress is advocating for was told in the film. And Tosin, ever so gentle and sleight of hand with the techniques, said, "Oh, that's where it's going to." And I just thought about it. I said, "Oh, wait, this is the land of the dead. He's taking a canoe ride to the land of the dead," and that's where the idea of Catabasis comes from. He's picked up by Charon, and that's how that element got into the story. Tosin, I don't know where you can take it from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Catabasis was something that Tolu, talked about a lot during the script conferences and even during our production meeting, as a way for really the team just to understand and get on board the visual imagery in a sense, and just the sort of the structuring behind those choices that were made on his journey to the village. And I think you've captured it perfectly in terms of what that represented and what the journey represented for him. And I think initially I probably had him going on land. He was initially going to have one act on land, and then eventually end up on in the water landscape. But then I think by the time it was condensed based on Tolu's direction, it just gave this really smooth passageway for our character, basically from the life he was living directly to this place of it's a place where he can come to himself. It's also a place where he was able to shed all that he knew, anything that he had become accustomed to or he had depended on. And he had to kind of just get back to the core of himself, in a sense, in a way before he could then go back and decide to live again. So there was a lot of themes that we were playing with and exploring with that journey and with that village. And so that was just, it was quite a strong theme that Tolu used during that process, just to help to drive, just to kind of give some sort of illustration to how we were depicting his journey.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I mean, I could talk about that whole journey for, I think it would have to be a separate episode, right? Because of life, life is that journey. So we could talk about life all day. And so Over the Bridge and what it does, I mean, in terms of the style and the location and transporting you into that feeling of that transition and who is Folarin, what is he doing? It's just beautiful, like the style and the locations. I know, Tolu, you spoke about symmetrical discomfort,
Yeah.
that to me, like, even just when I ask you this question, it sounds poetic, right? It makes me sound good. Like, how? Like, what does that mean for you? Like, why was it an important representation of Folarin's reality, right? Why was that important? And then how was it important for you to portray that in the styles, in the location of your story?
Okay, thank you. So I'd forgotten about that, but actually that describes it so aptly. So it's fitting that it comes from me, even though sometimes I forget some of these things. Yeah. So one of the first things I spoke to Tosin about was when we started talking about the marital, the issues within the marriage, and we wanted to, like, marriages are not great, that people have become accustomed to not being together. So there's always space between them. They delay exits and entrances. I started imagining that with lines, with, like, the first time we meet them, they're so uncomfortable to be together, and it's only for the camera. What brings them together is the array of cameras behind them. So when we also leave the relationship, we now start to see how Folarin is interacting, and Folarin he's sort of removed all the time from whatever situation he's in. When he's in the office, he's somewhat by himself. Even he's sort of in a different quadrant. Mm-hmm. And that was being told, that was had to be told with something, we've seen in quadrant framing, so it's sort of a different sort of space. Sometimes he's by himself, he's put to the side, and he's perhaps united by only one thing, which is the painting. That sort of that's the one thing that we kind of did this for telling of him being joined to the artwork, when in one kind of frame. But when he's with his wife, there's somewhat a little bit different. There's a little bit of a division or a line in between them in the beginning. So the idea was just to find a way to show his discomfort. I'd seen like works from like Terrence Malick, like when they had done Tree of Life, and I just I felt that thing really resonated and represented the idea of suffering, of internal suffering, and when you're by yourself. It's really, really spoke to me. In us trying to put it within this film was just to create space around Folarin, to isolate him as certain times, and even when he's sharing the same space with someone, there's a discordance between him and the person he's with. Up until the end, when he's figured his life out, he's figured himself out. He's realized that he can't be alone. He needs support. Literally, he sort of needs to lean into someone, or he continues just the way he's been. So that was the idea. Symmetry, the imbalance in his life was told by the lines we put him in, cinematically.
I think that was really beautifully conveyed. I think, like you said, just being in the opposite, but all at the same time, right? Present and at the same time absent. It was really well intense, but it was there. It was all there. And then I noticed, Tosin, that alongside your production efforts, you also had an impact producer on board. Could you tell me about like what is an impact producer and what was their role like in the project?
Yes, so I had an impact producer who came on, actually, I would say kind of towards the end of post-production and at the beginning of our release period or our marketing and distribution period. And so her role was really to try to ensure that the film, because we knew it was for particular audiences, was basically ensuring that the film reaches its audience. So for a particular sort of film with a narrative, well, and even irrespective of the narrative, actually, just ensuring that basically the film is able to make the desired amount of impact with its own specific audience. And so it's just making sure that it's making the right noises, going through the right channels, and kind of just directing the strategy towards the film's journey on its following its release. And so that was a very helpful process. It was just somebody that I feel was very passionate about the movie, and were able to kind of just collaborate together on how we felt the movie should be positioned. So an impact producer can start the project with you, where you chart the course of where it's going. They could even inform casting choices and various marketing decisions at the start of the process. So, but this process started a bit later on, which still was very useful and very helpful towards the film's journey. What was interesting is that I think even though she wasn't necessarily termed as one, but she does do this work, was the very first person who actually programmed our film, I felt also acted as an impact producer, because she selected it under her platform, Beyond Nollywood, because she felt that it could reach audiences in the UK in this very specific way. Yeah, exactly. And so she selected it for, and it was a collaboration with Picture House Cinemas, and that itself was impact producing, because it basically brought the film out. It was our first screening, actually. It was our premiere, and it was done in the UK, and that was as a result of understanding and really keying into what the film was about and who its audiences could be, and finding ways to marry that together. And that's actually what she does. She tries to, should we say, showcase and highlight films on the continent, particularly. She has focused on Nigerian films in the past, and that's where the name of her company comes from, and be able to kind of present it in a platform. And I think it really opened us up in that it kind of kicked off a chain reaction for us, in a sense, for future screenings. So that also was a type of impact producing.
Okay, so you're speaking of multiple co-productions there, right? If that's...
Yeah, so I'm speaking of different individuals who performed as impact producers. So we had one initially who came on board towards the end of the project, but we also had one who, and on account of her selection of the film for this initial screening and opening, also performed the role of an impact producer for the film's purposes. So the same film, but different timelines.
Okay, that's an interesting journey, and the whole production was obviously very, very interesting. But just in the sense, for me, like I said, I'm always taking the kind of Pan-African optic. And so it really is a Pan-African film, as you say, like it's merging different concepts. It is also merging different cultures in a way, because traditionally, the culture in Lagos isn't one to have private equity firms all over the place, but there are, right? Like there's a portion now of the economy that's dedicated to, a financial system that used to be alien, but is now like, adopted.
Absolutely.
And so there are areas in which the two, clash at times. And just the way that you portrayed it shows your experience in both of these worlds and your firsthand experience, obviously, for both of you. But being a Pan-African project, I wanted to know, what does Pan-Africanism mean to you individually?
Pan-Africanism for me is the idea that we have shared cultural links. Aside from identity, I think we're all under the umbrella of having been pre-colonized. We are underestimated in many ways in the global scheme of things. We're also, in many ways, we also share, there's a strong bedrock of stuff like we haven't even discovered of ourselves that has so much value to the world, which is why it's often discovered by other people. And it's either it's oil, it's bauxite, it's diamonds, it's something. There are rich resources that are in our countries. There are rich resources that are in our peoples that are yet undiscovered. And I feel that it's out of partnerships and connections with each other, telling each other stories about stuff that's happened to us that would enable us to come together and become, and to strengthen ourselves. Because we are all kind of, it's we try to keep saying we're family, yeah. But the reality of it is we're linked by this country that was forcefully divided, then people repatriated somewhere. And we're all linked by that. And it's not, for me, out of the sense of victimhood. It's out of the strength of surviving all those obstacles. And if we're able to have real conversations with each other, yeah. Right, out of that sense, because I think the period of enlightenment for us was when Chinua Achebe started reading Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and everybody kind of had a shared sense of, oh, we've all been through this. I think that period was perhaps one of the strongest times because our literature united us. I didn't know South Africans until I read Tell Freedom by Peter Abraham, right? Now, because I studied English, I'm a literature student. So if for instance, there's a curriculum, maybe Pan-Africanist or whatever it is, that forces all African students to study their origins, and we do it cross-culturally, and we all find the things that are similar, unite us, and we find out what's important about why this state is important, why these groups of people are this and that. There's going to emerge a block. We're going to be able to, even replicate or even supersede that knowledge, just the knowledge of self and the knowledge of what your environment offers. Then we now start trading. We start trading ideas. We start trading resources. That's, for me, is the future of what all our potential could be. And it makes it less that we have to keep running to the West all the time. That would change everything. These are my own central beliefs. I think, it's really that.
Wow, that was so powerful, Tolu. Thank you for sharing your optic. Tosin, did you want to share something, that you find depicts your version of Pan-Africanism?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I totally concur with everything Tolu has said. I think Pan-Africanism for me is about shared experience. And it's that shared experience. And I think why the subject is becoming so important is, I think it's because we're all realizing how important it is, how important our search for identity is. And I think because of that shared experience, we're almost able to come to this sense of really knowing who we are as the different countries having experienced what they've experienced and seeing the similarities in our histories based on, we've already mentioned, resources, and not just that, just the effect of our leadership has had on the economies as well, and based on also various exploitative things that have been done. I feel because of that, and this also links to Africans in the diaspora as well. So we all directly or indirectly have this very unconscious shared history that we can all relate to, and we all identify with. And I think that's why the subject or the topic is becoming much more prevalent in our storytelling as well. and how it can become stronger as well, if we do use the tools to try to start to harness some of these shared experiences together. I feel that we should never feel that we also need to gloss over the different experiences because they are quite distinct. However, there is some sort of uniformity, I think, when you look at it just more on a thematic scale in terms of what we've been through. And I think that's what can make the conversation stronger, but without us also losing our core. Well, an example, the recent riots that have happened in Kenya over the tax increases. As soon as everyone was watching that on TV, like all the Nigerians, everybody's blood kept rising because we could almost remember, it was almost like it was just yesterday, 4 years ago when we were protesting during the NSAS protest. So we shared that. It was like, oh, this is the same thing that was happening. We could understand, we could feel it. It was like we were there. And that's the sort of example of, because we're going through those similar things, immediately we see those actions happening, we identify with it. But however, the intricacies of our stories and our experiences are different, yes, but there is the shared experience that I think we can bring to bear. And if, like we've said, if we find ways to sort of harness that as a continent and with the diaspora, then yes, then we have opportunities to really grow in telling our stories.
Yeah, I want to say you have a Pan-African audience. The way a lot of these projects that they keep breaking little barriers and little barriers and little barriers. And so tell us more about, the Garden Theater, as well as the other production houses that you mentioned and that you worked with and collaborated with. And is there anything you can comment on with regards to like how much the film cost, its overall budget?
So overall budget was under $500,000, and off record I'll tell you how the range, what it was above what and what it was under, but then yes, under $500,000.
Wow.
Oh, so I guess that would be considered micro budget internationally.
No, I'm gonna check you there, Tosin. So I want to say, on the opposite side, it just goes to show how much on the continent a budget can take you, right? Like, so it's not a micro budget for Nollywood. Am I right, Tolu?
At all? No, for Nollywood, it's
at all.
So let's put it into perspective, right?
Exactly. So that's why I said internationally.
Because you're not talking dollar for dollar here. The money that was going out was in Naira.
Oh yes, yeah. So internationally, it's a micro budget, but in Nigeria, basically mid to high. So now you probably start to find those a few more films within that budget, within the higher end. However, what we also we're doing that alongside our parallel distribution network, and I suppose, one just has to consider how high the budgets can go for you to have a successful distribution pathways after the film is made. So, but then that's another discussion, really. So I mean, what's in store for the Garden Theatre? The next thing that we'll be working on is going to be a musical. So I started off in musical theatre, and I do work in both theatre and film. In terms of, I write for theatre as well as film. And so I would be hoping to embark on a musical theatre project. It was actually started a long time ago. And once I segued into film, it basically took a break. And now we are going to be reviving it. And I'll be working with a wonderful team of collaborators as well as producing partners on that journey, who I have also worked with before in the past. And yes, I think that's one of the next things on the slate. I know Tolu and I have been discussing his ideas, actually, some of his story ideas that he'd like to bring to life. And those are sounding very, very interesting. So we'll be going into development for some of those. And I think there's one particular project as well which may or may not be a spin-off of Over the Bridge. I say no more before I get slightly crucified, but may or may not be. But yes, but something that another series idea.
That's great.
Dealing again with the subject of and topic of mental health in the corporate world.
So okay, so more on the topic of mental health, still more film and kind of theater mixed together.
And theater, yeah.
Your beautiful garden. Thank you.
Yes.
Tosin.
I took a sabbatical, which is to segue into teaching. I started last year, and I'm using the opportunity to also work in development for a couple of story ideas. I'm working on a documentary which is about a migration event into Lagos, which I'm doing bits and parts of, which has so much. It goes into the idea of migration being essential for the development of Lagos. It's a very antithetical to some ideas. That new ideas tend to come in and revitalize the and I mean measured migration, not that. That's one. There's story ideas Tosi and I are developing on the slate. I see that I'll be pitching to Tosi on a couple more story ideas going forward. And that's it. That's really, really what I'm doing. I'm also just being more mindful of myself and just being more mindful and measuring the next steps of what we'll do. I'm working, of course. I'm in week 2 of the new cohort and the new intake, and I'm working with another set of bright young hopefuls who hopefully will change the way we do business, the kind of movies we'll make. That's pretty for me. Yeah, you can find my work on www.TOLULOPE and my social. I think what my Instagram, Tolu.Ajayi2. I can be found on X or Twitter as Tman14. There's a funny story behind it. It's TEEMAN 14. So at the time I was logging into Twitter many years ago, I was trying to input something else, and I didn't know that something else I was inputting. We were supposed to be it was supposed to be my name, the name people used to call me when I was in uni. T-Man. He ended up being my Twitter handle. I'm like, I thought it was very bizarre. So that's it. But yeah, you can find me in all those places. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
You can find me at the Garden Theatre on those spaces as well. Yeah.
At the Garden Theatre. Yes, keep that garden hydrated, Tosin. You're doing great.
Oh, thank you. Totally. Yes.
So yeah, thanks again. Thanks again for joining us. This has been really exhilarating. I appreciate your time and everything you did with your production. Wishing you all the best in everything that comes along.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and a lovely meeting you.